The caterer noticed first. She was carrying a tray of champagne flutes toward the patio when she stopped mid-step, eyes locked on my wrist. The cast was fresh, still white, still smelling faintly of plaster, and the antiseptic they'd used at the urgent care clinic on Route 9. I smiled at her. She didn't smile back. My fiancé was already at the podium, tapping the microphone twice, that easy grin he wore like armor spreading across his face. When he saw me walk in, he paused just long enough for his eyes to drop to the cast, then back up. No concern, no guilt. Just a flicker of something satisfied, like a man checking that a door he'd locked was still shut. Then he leaned into the mic and said, "There she is, my beautiful clumsy girl. Fell right off the porch step last night. I keep telling her to watch where she's going." The room laughed. 80 people, maybe more, laughing at a rehearsal dinner I had spent 4 months planning, in a restaurant I had chosen, wearing a dress I had bought with money I had earned. And my older sister, sitting 3 seats from the head table, laughed the loudest. "My name is Gemma Ainsworth." I know. My parents had a thing for old names. I'm 29 years old, a contracts analyst at a mid-size firm in Hartford, Connecticut. And that Friday evening, I was supposed to be celebrating the last weekend before becoming Mrs. Neil Prescott. Instead, I was standing in a doorway with a fractured wrist and a plan that had taken me 6 weeks to build. But I need to go back. Because the woman standing in that doorway wasn't the same woman who had said yes to Neil Prescott 20 months earlier. That woman believed in him. This one had receipts. I met Neil at a fundraiser for the Hartford Children's Hospital. He was on the board, naturally. Old Hartford money. His family ran Prescott Capital, a wealth management firm that had been around since his grandfather's era. Neil had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in a room of 300. He remembered your coffee order after one mention. He sent handwritten thank you notes on monogrammed stationery. My sister called him a unicorn. My mother said he was the kind of man you build a life around. I thought I was lucky. The first sign was so small I almost didn't catch it. 4 months in, I got a raise. Not a big one, but enough that my manager had pulled me into her office and said she was impressed with my contract reviews. I came home glowing. Neil listened, nodded, then said, "Just make sure they're not giving you more hours. I barely see you as it is." It sounded caring, it felt like a leash. I didn't know the difference yet. By month 8, I had learned his preferences so thoroughly they felt like my own. No red lipstick, no drinks with coworkers after 6, no posting on social media without him seeing it first. He framed it as privacy, as protecting what we had. "People get jealous of couples like us," he'd say. "Why invite that energy?" My sister would nod along when I mentioned it. "He's just protective, Gemma. That's what good men do." My mother echoed the same thing with slight variation. "You've always been too independent for your own good. Let the man lead." So I let him lead. I let him lead me right into a corner so tight I couldn't breathe without asking permission. The first time he grabbed me was over a text message. An old college friend, male, had sent me a happy birthday message with a cake emoji. Neil saw it while I was in the shower. When I came out, he was sitting on the bed holding my phone, jaw set like concrete. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave 4 bruises shaped like fingertips. "Who is Mateo?" he asked. "Calm as a weather report," I explained. He squeezed harder. "Delete him." I did. And then I apologized because somehow in the algebra of our relationship, his anger always equaled my fault. That was 14 months ago. The bruises faded. The pattern didn't. He never hit my face. Neil was too smart for that. Arms, ribs, once the back of my thigh when I laughed too loudly at a dinner party, and a colleague's husband looked at me a second too long. Always places clothes could cover. Always followed by a version of tenderness so convincing, I'd spend days wondering if I'd imagined the violence. He'd cook dinner. He'd run me a bath. He'd hold me like I was made of glass, which I suppose I was. He'd been cracking me for over a year. The person who saved me wasn't a therapist or a hotline or a moment of sudden clarity. It was Kinsley. My best friend since 7th grade, the kind of woman who notices when your laugh changes pitch. She'd been watching me shrink for months. She never confronted me directly. She knew I'd deny it. Instead, she did something quiet and brilliant. She installed a cloud-synced recording app on my phone during a brunch. "It's for voice memos," she said casually. "I use it for work." It wasn't for work. She'd configured it to back up automatically, every audio file, every video, to a cloud drive only she and I could access. Just in case, she told me later, just in case you ever need proof of something you shouldn't have to prove. 6 weeks before the wedding, Neil handed me a stack of papers and told me to sign them. It was a prenuptial amendment. The original prenup had been reasonable, drafted by both our lawyers, standard asset protection. This amendment was different. It would transfer my condo, the one I'd bought before I ever met him, into a joint trust managed by Prescott Capital. It would also roll my 401(a) and savings into a shared investment account under his family's firm. It's just a formality, he said. My father's accountant wants everything consolidated. He said it the way he said everything. Like it was already decided. I told him I'd look it over. He didn't like that. He leaned across the kitchen island and said, "Gemma, I'm not asking." That night I didn't sign. I didn't sleep either. But I did something I should have done months earlier. I started reading. I'm a contracts analyst. Reading fine print is literally my job. And what I found in those documents made my hands shake. The joint trust wasn't a trust in any real sense. It was a holding structure designed to absorb outside capital and redistribute it across 3 shell entities registered in Wyoming. I traced the entities through public filings. 2 of them had been flagged in a state auditor's report 6 months earlier for suspicious fund transfers. Prescott Capital wasn't consolidating assets. It was drowning in undisclosed debt, and Neil's father needed clean money to plug the holes before a federal review caught them. My condo, my savings, my name. I was the plug. I hired a forensic accountant. Paid her out of a savings account Neil didn't know existed, one I'd opened at a credit union across town the month after the first bruise. Her name was Dr. Anita Kowalski. She looked like someone's retired piano teacher, and she had the forensic instincts of a bloodhound. Within 3 weeks, she had mapped the entire structure. Prescott Capital was hemorrhaging. Neil's father had made a series of catastrophic bets on commercial real estate that had collapsed during the rate hikes. The firm owed more than it was worth. The wedding wasn't a wedding. It was a bailout dressed in white linen. I told Kinsley everything. She listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was furious. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want them to see me clearly, just once." She nodded. "Then we plan." 3 days before the wedding, I told Neil I had a concern about the amendment. He came to my condo to discuss it. I told him I wasn't comfortable signing without my own attorney reviewing the trust structure. His jaw tightened. He stepped closer. I knew the geometry of his anger by now. The way his shoulders squared, the way his chin dropped half an inch. He grabbed my right wrist and twisted it backward until I heard the snap before I felt it. Clean, sharp, like a branch breaking underfoot. I gasped, but I didn't scream. Screaming had never helped before. He let go. Looked at my wrist hanging at a wrong angle. Then he said flatly, "You'll sign it tomorrow, and you'll tell people you fell." He left. I drove myself to urgent care with my left hand, called Kinsley from the parking lot, and said, "The recording app got it." She was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Good. Now we finish this." The next morning my sister showed up at my apartment. She'd spoken to Neil already. I could tell by the way she walked in without knocking, purse over her shoulder, face arranged in that particular expression she uses when she's about to manage me. She looked at the cast. "He told me you slipped on the porch," she said. "Do you believe that?" I asked. She set her purse down carefully. "I believe that you need to stop pushing him, Gemma. He's under a lot of pressure with the firm. Men like him carry weight and I can't understand." I stared at her, my older sister, the woman who had braided my hair before school, who had punched a boy in 6th grade for pulling my backpack off my shoulders. She was looking at my fractured wrist and choosing his version. "Why?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. Just a half second. Then she said, "Neil offered me a position. Managing partner for the new client division. It starts after the wedding." There it was. Not loyalty. Not ignorance. Payment. She had been bought with a title and a salary, and the price was my silence. "Get out," I said. She didn't argue. She picked up her purse and left without looking back. And in that moment, the last thread connecting me to the woman I had been snapped cleaner than my wrist. The rehearsal dinner was held at Il Vesuvio, an upscale Italian restaurant in West Hartford that Neil's family had been using for events since before I was born. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, a jazz trio playing something soft enough to sound expensive. I arrived 20 minutes late, on purpose. I needed the room full. I needed the champagne flowing. I needed Neil relaxed and confident in performing. He didn't disappoint. The moment I stepped through the door with my cast visible below the sleeve of my navy dress, he launched into his cover story so smoothly you'd think he'd rehearsed it. Which of course he had. "There she is, my beautiful, clumsy girl. The room laughed. His father, sitting at the head table, chuckled into his bourbon. My mother, seated beside my sister, offered a tight smile. She didn't know the truth. She just knew not to ask questions about things that might complicate the wedding. My sister knew the truth and chose it anyway. I took my seat beside Neil. He leaned over, kissed my temple, and whispered, "You look beautiful." His hand rested on my thigh, not gently, a reminder. I smiled. Dinner was 4 courses. I ate none of them. I was running through the sequence in my head. Kinsley was in the parking lot, engine running, laptop open on the passenger seat, cloud drive loaded. The projection system at Il Vesuvio was Bluetooth accessible. I'd confirmed it with the AV coordinator that morning, told him I was preparing a surprise slideshow of our relationship for the toasts. He'd been delighted to help. After dessert, Neil stood up and clinked his glass. The room went quiet. He gave a toast so polished it could have been written by a publicist. He talked about partnership, respect, building something together. He used the word legacy 3 times. I counted. When he finished, the room applauded. Then he looked at me and said, "Gemma, do you want to say something?" I did. I stood slowly. The jazz trio stopped. 80 faces turned toward me. My mother's smile was cautious. My sister's was frozen. Neil's was generous, the smile of a man who believed he had already won. "Thank you all for being here," I said. My voice was steady. I'd practiced it in the mirror until steadiness became a weapon. Before we wrap up the evening, I'd like to share something with everyone. A short video. Something that captures what our relationship is really about. Neil's smile held, but his eyes shifted, just a fraction. The screen behind the bar flickered to life. The footage was from my phone, recorded automatically by Kinsley's app 3 days earlier. The kitchen of my condo. Neil's voice, clear as a bell. "You'll sign it tomorrow, and you'll tell people you fell." Then the sound that had woken me up every night since. A quick brittle crack, followed by my sharp intake of breath. The angle caught his hand on my wrist. The twist, the release, my arm dropping. The room didn't gasp. It went silent the way rooms go silent when something breaks that can't be put back together. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. The bartender set down a glass and didn't pick it up again. I paused the video. "I didn't fall off the porch," I said quietly. "He broke my wrist because I wouldn't sign a document transferring my assets into his family's failing investment firm." Neil stood up. His chair scraped against the hardwood. "Turn that off. She's having a breakdown. She's been under a lot of stress and frankly—" "Sit down, Neil," I said. Not loudly. I didn't need to be loud anymore. I reached into the folder I'd tucked under my chair and pulled out the documents. Dr. Kowalski's report, 23 pages. Shell companies, concealed liabilities, fund transfers that didn't match any legitimate transaction pattern. The pending federal inquiry. "Prescott Capital is insolvent," I said, holding up the first page so the room could see the letterhead. "It has been for over a year. The firm owes more than $22 million in undisclosed debt tied to failed commercial real estate investments. Neil's father has been moving client funds through shell entities registered in Wyoming to cover the shortfall." I turned to his father. "The IRS and the SEC were both notified this morning. By me." Neil's father stood up so fast his chair tipped over. His face was the color of old paper. "Is this true?" he asked. But he wasn't asking me. He was asking Neil. And Neil couldn't answer because the room had already started doing what rooms do when the truth lands. People were whispering. A man in the 3rd row, someone I recognized as a client of the firm, was already on his phone. Neil turned to me, voice low, trembling with the kind of rage that used to terrify me. "You have no idea what you've done." "I do," I said. "I read the contracts, all of them. That's my job." My sister was gripping the edge of the table, her face a shade I'd never seen before. Pale green, the color of someone watching their future dissolve. I looked at her. "The managing partner position he offered you?" I said. "It was attached to the new client division, the one funded entirely by redirected client assets. If the SEC investigation holds, and it will, that position makes you complicit in securities fraud." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. My mother looked between us, confused, frightened, beginning to understand something she hadn't wanted to see. "Gemma, what is happening?" "What's happening," I said gently, "is that I'm ending this." I set the folder on the table. I slid the engagement ring off my finger and placed it on top of the documents. The diamond caught the light from the chandelier, throwing tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. I'd loved that ring once. Now it was just evidence. I walked toward the door. Neil didn't follow me. He was standing at the table with his hands flat on the surface, staring at the documents like they might rearrange themselves into something he could survive. His father had already left through the kitchen entrance. Two of his clients were heading for the front door, phones pressed to their ears. My sister caught my arm in the hallway, not hard, carefully, like she'd just remembered how. "Gemma, please. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know he was hurting you." I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. "You saw the cast," I said. "You chose not to know." She let go. Outside, the October air hit my face like cold water. Kinsley was waiting by the car, just like she'd promised. She didn't ask if I was okay, she could see that I was different from okay. Something harder and cleaner than okay. "You ready?" she asked. I pulled out my phone and dialed. When the dispatcher answered, I said, "I'd like to report a domestic assault. My name is Gemma Ainsworth. My fiancé, Neil Prescott, fractured my wrist 3 days ago. I have video evidence, medical records from Hartford urgent care, and I'd like to press charges." The dispatcher asked me to hold. I held. Kinsley leaned against the car beside me, arms crossed, watching the restaurant door like a guard dog. Nobody came out. I gave my statement over the phone, agreed to come to the station the next morning, and hung up. Then I sat in the passenger seat of Kinsley's Subaru and stared at my cast. Someone had drawn a small smiley face on it at the urgent care clinic, a nurse with kind eyes. I hadn't noticed it until now. "What happens next?" Kinsley asked. "Lawyers, paperwork, probably a lot of it. And your sister? I thought about that for a long time. She'll call, eventually, when the shock wears off and the guilt sets in. Whether I answer depends on what she says." Kinsley started the engine. The jazz trio was still playing inside Il Vesuvio. I could hear it faintly through the walls, something smooth and unbothered, the kind of music that plays in rooms where people are pretending everything is fine. 3 months later, Prescott Capital announced it was restructuring under new management. Neil resigned from the board, citing personal reasons. His father's law firm issued a statement denying wrongdoing, the kind of statement that costs $50,000 and convinces no one. The federal investigation was ongoing. Neil was charged with third-degree assault. He pleaded no contest. The judge issued a protective order. My attorney told me the financial fraud case would take longer, possibly years. I told her I had time. My sister did call, 6 weeks after the dinner. She didn't apologize at first. She asked how I was doing, which isn't the same thing. But the second time she called, she said, "I should have believed you. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. But I stayed on the line. My mother invited me to Thanksgiving. I went. We didn't talk about Neil or the wedding or the cast. We talked about her garden, a new rosemary plant that wasn't taking. It was small, it was enough. The cast came off in November. The bone healed slightly crooked. My doctor said it might ache in cold weather, and she was right. Some mornings in January, when the Connecticut frost settles in, my right wrist throbs like a second heartbeat. I don't mind it. It reminds me of something I need to remember. He told me I fell. I told 80 people the truth. He expected silence. I gave him consequences. And every time my wrist aches, I remember that the woman who drove herself to urgent care with one hand is the same woman who picked up a microphone with the other. Some lessons you learn because someone tries to break you, and some lessons you teach because you refuse to stay broken.